Today we're talking about layers on a gel plate. That means we're going to build up dried paint on the gel plate and then cross our fingers and hope it all releases from the plate in one pull. So stay tuned to the end of the video for the dramatic reveal. I'm Drew Steinbrecher and welcome to my channel. When building layers on a gel plate, the first thing we need to talk about is paint transparency. Acrylic paints vary in opacity, meaning some are more transparent than others. The better brands will tell you on the bottles. These Liquitex bottles have a filled in, half filled in, or an empty box, indicating they're opaque, semi-opaque, or transparent, respectively. The golden bottles and tubes literally have a swatch of the actual paint over top of the black bars. How much the black bar you can see indicates the opacity. To demonstrate this further, I drew black lines on these pieces of paper. Looking at the bottles, the blue paint is opaque and the yellow is transparent. I roll them onto the plate, add the paper, and pull the print. While the blue paint doesn't 100% cover the black, it's definitely not as clear as the yellow. I'll show you again with these orange and pink paints. The bottles say the orange is transparent and the pink is opaque. Keep in mind, the lighter the paint, the less opaque it will be, even if the bottle says it's opaque, as you can see here with the pink. Okay, Drew, that's all great, but what does this mean for creating layers on a gel plate? Okay, well, cool your horses. Let's do one more demonstration. On the top of the plate, I have the pink opaque paint, and on the bottom, I have the yellow transparent paint. We'll let that dry for a few minutes. After it's dry, I'm going to add two other paints to the plate. On the left side, I'm using a transparent orange, and on the right, an opaque blue. This time I'm adding the paper right away and pulling the print. This print tells us how the transparent and the opaque paints interact on the plate. On the bottom right are both transparent paints. You can see they combine to make a third color. On the upper right, the pink paint that's mostly opaque covered up the orange. In the lower left, the transparent yellow mixed with the blue and made green. Yellow and blue make green. In the upper left, the pink paint mostly covered up the blue. So keep this in mind when you're creating layers on a gel plate. So let's actually make a print. I'm going to start with some stencils. Stencils are great for the first layer and layered prints. Remember, the first layer is the top layer you'll see on the print. I'm using the opaque pink paint. I'm careful not to cover the entire plate because I want to be able to see the subsequent layers underneath. I use some scrap paper to remove some of the paint here and there to add some texture and depth. We'll let that layer dry. Remember, you need to let your layers dry before adding another layer. For the second layer, we'll use some masks. These are great for second layers as they'll, mask the later layers. I'm using the translucent green, so that will be affected by the next layer. So I'm expecting the color to change. For the last layer, I use blue, covering the entire plate and adding the paper. I'll let the paper sit for about 5 minutes and then pull the print. You can see the translucent green changed because the blue in the last layer. And the opaque pink stands out, but there's texture and depth here and there because I removed some of it with the scrap paper. Now that we know the basics, let's make a more complex print. I have some stencils here that I made using printouts of leaves on cardstock. I just printed them out on my inkjet printer, then cut them out with a craft knife. I'm using a smaller gel plate to ink up my brayer, and a larger gel plate, which is where I will build the print. I start by adding some magenta-y paint to the plate. It's semi-opaque. I want an autumn theme here, so I'm sticking mostly to warmer colors. I add paint to the brayer using the smaller plate, then grab the stencil, then start adding the leaf shapes to the gel plate. The paint starts to dry on the smaller plate and I can't roll any more onto the brayer, so I grab some extra paper, place it on the smaller plate, to clean it off. Now that the small plate is clean again, I continue adding the leaf shapes using warmer autumn colors. Because the stencils are not very wide, I need to be sure I don't roll the brayer off the side and accidentally get paint where I don't want it. If I do, I can use some paper towel and water to clean it off. I add some green to the plate because it's autumn and not all the leaves have changed yet, duh. Of course, remember that you need to let each layer dry before adding more paint to the plate. Next, I grab my acrylic paint markers and add some dots around the plate. This adds texture to the composition. Adding these dots in between adding the layers of leaves will emphasize the layers, which adds depth. Overlapping the elements in a composition suggests depth. I go back to adding more leaves. Remember, the first few layers will show on top when you pull the print. So keep in mind as the gel plate fills up and you add more layers, the less will be seen when you pull the print. Also, don't forget about the opacity of the paints. Here I'm adding some almost white leaves using opaque white because I want them to stand out from the layers I add next. One thing I like to do on the final layers is use white paper to mask off different areas. It's a great way to add some visual interest instead of just pulling the print off the plate with a solid color background. I'm sticking to muted, lighter colors that I've already used in the composition to bring unity to the piece. Don't forget you can pull up the bottom of the plate to see how it's going. I decide to add one more layer before pulling the final print. When it comes to paper for these layered prints, you want something that has quality and some weight. I'm using some cardstock. I'm using white paint here because I don't want the color to interact with the previous layers. I add the paint directly to the plate and make sure it's an even layer before laying down the paper. I press for a minute or two and then lay a heavy book on top. I let it sit for a few hours, but you can let it sit overnight. When you're ready to pull, turn the whole thing over. That way you can pull the plate from the paper without creasing the heavy cardstock. And there you go, a layered gel plate print. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.